The gleaming halls of Galactic Research Station Delta buzzed with the usual mix of alien languages and the hum of advanced machinery. Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth's top xenobiologist, walked through the arrival chamber with her small travel bag, taking in the sights of the most prestigious research facility in the known universe. A tall, blue-skinned Centaurian rushed up to her, antennae twitching nervously. "Dr. Chen, thank the stars you've arrived. I'm Dr. Zax, head of orientation." He paused, looking around anxiously before continuing. "There's something urgent we need to discuss before your assignment begins." Sarah raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected such a nervous welcome from a senior staff member. "Is everything all right, Dr. Zax?" The Centaurian guided her to a quiet corner of the arrival lounge, away from the steady stream of beings moving through the station. Three of his four hands rummed together in obvious distress. "Dr. Chen, your credentials are impressive, and we're honored to have you. But there's been a slight change in your lab assignment." "A change?" Sarah frowned. She had been looking forward to working in the cross-species genetics department. "Yes, you see, we've had an incident with Dr. Cathrax." Zax's voice dropped to a whisper at the name, and nearby aliens visibly flinched. "Your predecessor, well, all five of them, they couldn't handle it. They're currently in various psychiatric facilities across the galaxy." Sarah's scientific curiosity immediately piqued. "Dr. Cathrax, the Void Walker scientist. I've read some of her theoretical papers on dimensional biology. They're brilliant. Brilliant but dangerous." A chittering Arxian researcher interrupted, mandibles clicking rapidly. "She exists in multiple dimensions at once. Just being near her can break your mind. My colleague looked at her directly last month. He's still in therapy, babbling about seeing every possible version of himself dying simultaneously." Dr. Zax nodded solemnly. "We've had to isolate her in the station's East Wing. Nobody goes there anymore. The cleaning is done by robots, and food is delivered by automated systems. Even the most experienced scientists can't handle more than a few minutes in her presence." "What exactly happens to people around her?" Sarah asked, pulling out her tablet to take notes. This was far more interesting than regular genetic research. "The Void Walkers, they perceive reality differently." Another scientist joined in, this one a floating crystalline being. "But Cathrax is different even for her kind. She doesn't just see multiple dimensions, she bleeds them into our reality. It drives most beings insane. The way she moves, speaks, it's like watching reality tear itself apart." Sarah's eyes lit up with fascination. "So she's completely isolated. No research partners, no collaboration. Nobody wants to work with her," Dr. Zax explained. "Even her own kind avoid her. She's too intense, too far removed from normal dimensional existence. We can't legally ask her to leave. Her research is too valuable. But we can't risk more scientists losing their minds." Rather than fear, Sarah felt a surge of excitement. A completely unique being with unexplored biological properties, isolated due to others' limitations. This was exactly the kind of challenge she'd been looking for. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I'll work with Dr. Cathrax." The assembled aliens stared at her in horror. Dr. Zax's antennae went completely still, a sign of extreme distress in Centaurians. "Dr. Chen, you don't understand. This isn't about bravery or skill. The human mind wasn't evolved to comprehend." "Maybe that's exactly why I should try," Sarah interrupted. "Every species perceives reality differently. Maybe humans will see something others missed." As she walked away toward the East Wing, ignoring the protests behind her, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She'd come to Galactic Research Station Delta hoping to study alien biology. Instead, she might have stumbled upon the most fascinating research opportunity in human history. Behind her, Dr. Zax watched her go with all four hands clasped in prayer. "Another one lost," he whispered. "May the stars have mercy on her mind." The East Wing of Galactic Research Station Delta was eerily quiet. Sarah's footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as she made her way to Dr. Cathrax's lab. Emergency lights cast a dim red glow, and warning signs in multiple alien languages covered the walls. A small floating robot blocked her path. Warning: you are entering a restricted area. Prolonged exposure to Dr. Kithrax may cause severe mental trauma. Please turn back. Sarah pulled out her access card. Override. Authorization. Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth Sciences Division. The robot beeped sadly. Override accepted. Please sign this mental health waiver. After signing the digital form, Sarah continued down the corridor. The temperature dropped noticeably, and she could hear a strange humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Her tablet's screen flickered with interference. Through the lab's transparent walls, she saw something move. At first, Sarah thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The figure inside seemed to shift and flow like smoke, with limbs that appeared and disappeared at impossible angles. This had to be Dr. Kithrax. Sarah took a deep breath and pressed her hand to the lab's biosensor. The door slid open with a soft hiss. Another one. The voice came from everywhere at once, somehow both whispered and thunderous. How many more minds must I accidentally break before they stop sending people? Sarah stepped into the lab, forcing herself to look directly at Kithrax. The Voidwalker existed in a way that made Sarah's eyes hurt, like trying to look at a four-dimensional object squeezed into 3 dimensions. Multiple arms moved through space in ways that shouldn't be possible, and her form seemed to ripple with shadows that cast light instead of darkness. Dr. Kithrax, Sarah said, proud that her voice remained steady. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen from Earth. I've read your paper on cross-dimensional cellular adaptation. It's fascinating work. Kithrax turned, and Sarah felt reality bend slightly. Where other beings might have a face, Kithrax had what looked like a spiral of starlight folding in on itself. You're still conscious. There was surprise in her multi-tone voice. I'm experiencing some disorientation, Sarah admitted, leaning against a desk as the room seemed to tilt. But nothing I can't handle. My species evolved to filter out most sensory input. It might actually be helping right now. Kithrax moved closer, her form rippling with interest. Several of her arms, Sarah couldn't count exactly how many, gestured at various scientific instruments. The others, they screamed when they saw their alternate selves. You're seeing them too, aren't you? All your possible lives. Sarah nodded, closing her eyes for a moment. Yes, hundreds of different versions of myself, but they're like background noise. I can focus on this reality, this version of me. Remarkable. Thrax's voice echoed with excitement. Your mind. It's compartmentalizing the dimensional bleeding naturally. No other species has managed that without extensive training. Opening her eyes again, Sarah smiled at the spot where she thought Kithrax's face might be. Maybe that's why humans are so good at denial and focusing on single tasks. We evolved ignoring most of reality just to function. Kithrax made a sound that might have been laughter. It reminded Sarah of wind chimes in a hurricane. You're making jokes. Even my own kind can't maintain humor in my presence anymore. Well, Sarah said, pulling out her tablet despite its flickering screen. Humor is another great human coping mechanism. Now, would you mind explaining these equations from your paper? I have some ideas about applying them to human cellular structures. For the first time in years, Kithrax felt hope. This human wasn't just tolerating her presence, she was actively engaging with it. As Sarah started asking detailed questions about the research, Kithrax's form settled slightly, becoming almost stable. Outside the lab, the small robot updated its log. Human subject showing no signs of mental deterioration after initial contact. Updating previous estimates. Probability of success. Calculating. 2 weeks had passed since Sarah's first meeting with Kithrax, and the station staff was amazed that she was still sane. Every morning, they watched with a mixture of fear and curiosity as she walked confidently toward the East Wing, carrying her tablet and a cup of coffee. Today was different. Sarah had made a breakthrough. I think I understand why others go mad around you. Sarah said, drawing diagrams on the lab's holographic display. Despite the constant dimensional interference, she had gotten used to the way equipment behaved strangely in Kithrax's presence. It's not just about seeing alternate versions of themselves. Kithrax moved closer, her form casting impossible shadows on the walls. Explain. Most species evolved to process reality in a single linear way. Sarah continued, taking a sip of her coffee. The liquid rippled with tiny waves that moved in several directions at once. When they're near you, they're forced to process everything at once, all possibilities, all timelines, all versions of themselves. But you can handle it, Kithrax observed. Her voice had become less disorienting to Sarah over time, though it still echoed strangely in the lab. Why? Sarah smiled. Because humans are naturally bad at processing reality. We evolved to ignore most of what we see and hear just to get through our daily lives. Our brains are constantly filtering out information that doesn't fit our current focus. She pointed to her coffee cup. Look at this. I know the coffee is moving in ways that defy physics. I can see at least 7 different versions of this cup existing at once. But my brain just files that away as not important right now and lets me drink it anyway. Kithrax's form shimmered with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. That's why you didn't break when you saw your other selves. Your species has evolved to ignore uncomfortable realities. Exactly. Sarah stood up, pacing as she explained. Humans are champions at compartmentalizing. We can know something exists without letting it affect our current task. It's probably why we can believe contradicting things at the same time, or focus on work while our personal lives are in chaos. Thrax moved to her main research console, multiple arms typing on different keyboards simultaneously. This changes everything. If we can understand how human consciousness filters multiple realities, we might be able to help others adapt to multidimensional exposure. Sarah finished. Thrax, you don't have to be isolated anymore. We could teach others to process your presence safely. The Void Walker's form became unusually still. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than usual, almost vulnerable. You would do this. Help others. Understand me. Sarah walked closer to her research partner, ignoring the way reality seemed to bend around them. Of course, nobody should have to work alone just because they're different. Besides, she grinned, the coffee breaks are much more interesting when physics doesn't work properly. For the first time since Sarah had met her, Kithrax laughed openly. The sound made all the equipment in the lab float briefly, and several alternate timelines became visible for a moment before settling back. Outside the lab, Dr. Zax watched through the security feed with his mouth open in shock. Not only was the human surviving prolonged exposure to Kithrax, but she was actually making jokes and conducting groundbreaking research. Perhaps, he muttered to himself, antennae twitching thoughtfully. We've been looking at this all wrong. What if the very traits we thought made humans primitive, their limited perception, their ability to ignore reality, actually make them the most advanced among us? Inside the lab, Sarah and Kithrax were already planning their next experiment, both scientist and Void Walker finally feeling understood for the first time in their lives. News of Sarah and Kithrax's research spread through Galactic Research Station Delta like wildfire. 1 month after their initial breakthrough, scientists from other departments started gathering near the East Wing's observation windows, watching the unlikely pair work. Inside the lab, Sarah adjusted her monitoring equipment, while Kithrax's form twisted through several dimensions at once. They had converted half the lab into a testing area, with sensors everywhere. Ready for test number 47? Sarah asked, checking her tablet's readings. Thrax's starlight face sparkled. Yes. This time, try to maintain awareness of exactly 3 alternate timelines while keeping your focus here. Like we practiced. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. Over the past weeks, she had learned to not just ignore the dimensional bleeding, but to actually control how much of it she perceived. It was like turning a mental dial, allowing different levels of reality to filter through. Beginning test, Cathrax announced, her voice resonating across multiple dimensions. She raised several of her arms, and reality began to split around Sarah. Sarah saw herself in 3 other timelines. One where she became a doctor like her parents wanted, another where she joined the space military, and a third where she never left Earth. But unlike before, these visions didn't overwhelm her. They stayed neatly organized in her mind, like different tabs open on a computer. Vital signs stable, Cathrax reported, moving through the spaces between realities to check different instruments. Consciousness coherent across all perceived dimensions. Sarah, this is remarkable. Outside the lab, the watching scientists gasped as Sarah's form seemed to flicker between 4 different versions of herself, all while she remained perfectly calm and focused. Dr. Zax burst into the observation area, all 4 hands holding different data pads. The readings are off the charts. She's not just tolerating the dimensional exposure, she's actively controlling it. Inside, Sarah smiled as she carefully cataloged each timeline. Thrax, I think I understand why humans are good at this. We spend our whole lives dealing with what-if scenarios in our heads. We're constantly imagining different versions of our lives, different choices we could have made. Maybe we've been training for this without knowing it. Cathrax's form shimmered with excitement. Yes, your species' tendency to daydream, to imagine alternatives. It's not a weakness like other species thought. It's preparation for higher dimensional awareness. Suddenly, one of the monitoring devices started beeping rapidly. Sarah's eyes widened as she felt something new. Cathrax, I'm seeing something else, something beyond the test parameters. What do you mean? Cathrax moved closer, her form becoming more focused. I can see connections, threads between the timelines, like they're all part of a bigger pattern. Sarah's voice was filled with wonder. Is this how you see things all the time? Cathrax became completely still, her starlight face blazing brighter than ever. Sarah, you're not just perceiving multiple dimensions. You're starting to understand how they interact. No non-void walker has ever managed that before. The observation area erupted in excited chatter. Scientists from dozens of species were frantically taking notes and calling their colleagues. This wasn't just a breakthrough in human void walker relations. It was changing their understanding of consciousness itself. Dr. Zax stared at his readings in amazement. To think, all this time we thought humans were limited because they could only perceive one reality clearly. But that limitation forced them to imagine other possibilities, to dream about different futures. They'd been practicing dimensional thinking through pure imagination. Inside the lab, Sarah carefully ended the test, letting the other timelines fade back into the background of her consciousness. She looked at Cathrax, who was still radiating amazement. Ready to try for 4 timelines next time? Sarah asked with a grin. Cathrax's laugh made reality ripple around them. My dear friend, I think you're ready for anything. The emergency alarms of Galactic Research Station Delta blared through every corridor. Red lights flashed as terrified scientists ran towards the escape pods. In the station's central control room, engineers frantically worked at their stations while warning messages appeared on every screen. The dimensional stabilizers are failing, shouted a crystalline engineer, their form crackling with stress. Something's torn a hole between dimensions. Dr. Zax burst into the control room, all 4 hands typing on different emergency terminals. How long until complete failure? 20 minutes at most, the engineer replied. We're detecting reality fractures spreading from the lower levels. If we don't contain this, the entire station will be pulled into the void between dimensions. In the East Wing, Sarah and Cathrax were already analyzing the problem on their lab's instruments. Cathrax's form was more unstable than usual, her starlight face pulsing with worry. The tear is growing, Cathrax said, her voice echoing more than normal. The station's normal stabilizers can't handle this level of dimensional bleeding. Sarah watched as small objects around the lab began to float, some existing in multiple places at once. What caused it? The station's been holding back the natural dimensional flow around me for too long, Cathrax explained, her form rippling with guilt. The stabilizers weren't designed for years of continuous use. They're overloading. The station shuddered violently. Through the lab windows, Sarah could see other scientists running towards the evacuation points. Some were already seeing multiple versions of themselves, screaming in terror as reality began to break down around them. "There has to be a way to close it," Sarah said, refusing to join the evacuation. She looked at the readings again, remembering their recent breakthroughs. "Thrax, could you seal the tear yourself?" "Yes, but—" Thrax's voice became heavy with concern. "I would need an anchor point in this dimension, something to hold on to while I reach across the void. Without it, I could get lost between realities." Sarah stood straighter, understanding what needed to be done. "Use me. I can be your anchor." "Sarah, no." Thrax's form flared with alarm. "The dimensional forces involved. You would have to perceive everything at once. All realities, all possibilities with no filters. Even with your training, it could destroy your mind." Another violent shake rocked the station. Emergency announcements in multiple languages urged everyone to evacuate immediately. Sarah stepped closer to her friend. "You've been alone for so long because everyone was afraid to help you. I'm not afraid. I trust you, Thrax." Thrax's starlight face dimmed with emotion. "And I trust you, my friend. But this is beyond any of our tests. You would have to hold on to your core consciousness while experiencing every possible timeline simultaneously." "Then it's a good thing humans are stubborn," Sarah said with a determined smile. "We're really good at holding on to who we are, even when everything else changes." The station's lights flickered as more systems began to fail. Through their lab windows, they could see the dimensional tear spreading, reality itself cracking like broken glass. "There's no time to argue," Sarah insisted. "Everyone else has evacuated. We're the only ones who can fix this." Thrax moved closer, her form becoming more focused. "Very well. But remember, no matter what you see, no matter what you experience, hold on to this moment. This reality. This is your anchor point." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath as she faced her friend. "I'm ready." As Thrax reached out with multiple arms that crossed through dimensions, Sarah steeled herself for what was coming. The last thing she heard before reality exploded around her was Dr. Zax's voice over the station's speakers. "May the stars protect them both." Reality shattered around Sarah like broken mirrors, each piece showing a different version of her life. She saw every choice she had ever made and hadn't made, all playing out simultaneously. She was everywhere and everyone at once. She was a doctor on Earth, a soldier in the galactic fleet, a farmer on Mars, a teacher, a mother, an explorer, thousands of Sarahs living thousands of lives. The weight of infinite possibilities pressed against her mind like an ocean trying to crush a submarine. "Hold on, Sarah." Thrax's voice echoed across all dimensions. "Focus on my voice. Remember who you are in this moment." Sarah felt like her consciousness was spreading too thin, stretching across too many realities. But somewhere in the chaos, she remembered her training. She remembered how humans naturally filtered out most of reality just to function. I am Sarah Chen," she gasped, her voice somehow reaching through the dimensional storm. "Xenobiologist, friend to Thrax. This is my reality." Thrax's form moved through the void between dimensions, her multiple arms weaving reality back together like threading a cosmic needle. She used Sarah's consciousness as an anchor point, a beacon of stability in the chaos. In the station's control room, the few remaining emergency staff watched in amazement as their instruments recorded the impossible. The dimensional tear was actually closing. "The human," Dr. Zax whispered, his antennae trembling. "She's not just surviving the exposure, she's cataloging it. Look at these brain wave patterns." On their screens, they could see Sarah's mind processing and organizing the infinite realities flooding through her consciousness. Where others would have shattered, her mind was adapting, creating new pathways to handle the overwhelming input. Inside the dimensional storm, Sarah made a discovery. Thrax, I can see the pattern. All these realities, they're like a giant library. We just need to put the books back on the right shelves. Understanding flowed between them. Together, they began sorting reality itself. Thrax provided the power and the reach across dimensions, while Sarah's mind created the organization system, her human ability to categorize and compartmentalize serving as a template for reality to follow. The tear began closing faster. Throughout the station, floating objects returned to their proper places. Scientists who had been seeing multiple versions of themselves found their vision clearing. It's working, Dr. Zach shouted, watching the readings normalize. They're actually doing it. In the heart of the dimensional storm, Sarah felt her consciousness expanding in a way she knew should be impossible. But instead of breaking, her mind adapted. She was learning to read the library of reality, to understand its organization. With a final surge of effort, Thrax pulled the last threads of reality together. The tear sealed with a sound like thunder that echoed across all dimensions. The dimensional bleeding stopped. Sarah collapsed to the lab floor, her mind overwhelmed but intact. Thrax's form solidified more than anyone had ever seen before, her starlight face focused entirely on her friend. "Sarah, are you?" Thrax began. "I'm okay," Sarah interrupted, slowly sitting up. She blinked, adjusting to seeing just one reality again. That was, actually, kind of amazing. The lab door burst open as medical teams and station officials rushed in. They stopped short, amazed to find both Sarah and Thrax not just alive but conscious and coherent. Dr. Zax pushed through the crowd, scanning them both with trembling hands. "Impossible. Dr. Chen, your mind should have been destroyed. Instead, it's evolved. You're processing dimensional information like a void walker, but with human organization patterns." Sarah looked up at Thrax and smiled. "Well, sometimes the best way to handle too much information is to turn it into a library. That's something humans have always been good at, taking chaos and creating categories." Thrax's laugh made everyone in the room see brief glimpses of other realities, but for the first time, nobody ran away in fear. 3 months after the dimensional crisis, Galactic Research Station Delta was busier than ever. Scientists from across the galaxy crowded the corridors, all hoping to learn from what they now called the Chen Thrax breakthrough. The East Wing, once avoided by everyone, had become the station's most popular area. Through its windows, visitors could watch as Sarah Chen taught a small group of human students how to perceive multiple dimensions safely. "Remember," Sarah told her class, standing next to Thrax, whose form now shifted more gently than before, "think of it like organizing a library. Each reality is just another book on the shelf. You don't have to read them all at once." The students nodded, their minds already adapting to seeing multiple versions of themselves. Where other species had fled in terror, these humans were taking notes and asking questions about their alternate lives. Dr. Zax entered the classroom, carrying new data on all 4 hands. The latest results are amazing. Humans aren't just tolerating dimensional exposure. They're naturally gifted at it. Their brains actually create new neural pathways to handle the information. Thrax's starlight face sparkled with pride as she watched Sarah teach. "It makes perfect sense now. Humans spent their evolution learning to ignore most of reality just to survive. Their brains are already experts at filtering and organizing information." In another part of the station, a group of void walkers was meeting with human scientists. For the first time in galactic history, the mysterious beings could interact with others without causing mental trauma. They had learned to control their dimensional bleeding using techniques developed from studying human consciousness. "The galaxy got it backwards," Sarah explained to a reporter from the Galactic Science Academy. "Everyone thought humans were primitive because we could only perceive one reality clearly. But that limitation forced us to develop amazing mental organization skills. We're like librarians of reality." The reporter's tentacles wiggled with excitement. "And now you're teaching these skills to others." "Yes." Sarah smiled, watching as Cathrax demonstrated dimensional theory to the class. Humans are training to work with void walkers, and void walkers are learning to control their dimensional effects. We're breaking down barriers that have existed for millennia. In the station's main hall, a new plaque had been installed. It showed an image of Sarah and Cathrax working together, with words in multiple languages. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from what others see as weakness. The Chen-Cathrax breakthrough showed us that limitation can lead to innovation. Later that evening, Sarah and Cathrax stood in their lab, looking out at the stars. Cathrax's form was more stable than ever, though she still existed in multiple dimensions at once. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked, sipping her coffee, which now stayed firmly in one reality. "When we first met." Cathrax's laugh no longer made reality ripple uncontrollably. "That the most feared being in the galaxy would end up co-teaching dimensional physics. No, I had accepted my isolation as permanent. And I just wanted to study alien biology." Sarah grinned. "Instead, we revolutionized galactic science and proved that humanity's greatest weakness was actually our greatest strength." Through the lab windows, they could see new students arriving, humans eager to learn dimensional perception, and void walkers ready to learn human mental organization techniques. The East Wing, once a place of fear and isolation, had become a center of learning and cooperation. Dr. Zax, passing by their lab, smiled at the sight of human and void walker working together. His antennae twitched with amusement as he remembered his initial warnings to Sarah. Perhaps, he muttered to himself, we should be more careful about judging limitations. After all, the human who wasn't afraid of the most terrifying being in the galaxy just proved that sometimes the very thing that holds you back can be the thing that helps you break through. Inside the lab, Sarah and Cathrax continued planning their next breakthrough, no longer alone, no longer feared, but pioneers of a new era in galactic cooperation.